Welcome to the Explainer. So let's dive right into some research from mysterious code that is literally going to save every CloudFormation developer out there from totally unnecessary deployment headaches. Look, if you work with infrastructure as code, you already know it's incredibly powerful, right? But you also know the very specific, excruciating pain of waiting for a massive stack to deploy, only for the whole thing to just crash and burn at the absolute last second. So today, we're unpacking how to validate those CloudFormation templates, and specifically, we're throwing two major tools into the ring, the AWS CLI and cfn-lint. It's the ultimate developer mystery, isn't it? Why do seemingly clean templates still trigger rollbacks? You know the drill. You carefully write your template, you run a quick manual check, the terminal flashes green, and you think, awesome, we're good to go. You hit deploy, grab your coffee, feeling great, and then boom, total failure. Seriously, why does a template that passes validation with flying colors still crash the actual second you try to build it in the cloud? And that frustrating mystery leads us right here. Update_rollback_in progress. Oof, just hearing that phrase probably spiked your blood pressure a little bit, didn't it? I mean, we can all empathize with the sheer agony of staring at the AWS console for 20 minutes, literally watching paint dry, just to see that dreaded red status message. It completely tanks your state of flow, it's a massive time sink, and honestly, it's basically the most expensive, inefficient way possible to find a simple typo in your code. Okay, let's get into Section 1, the flawed hero, otherwise known as AWS CLI Validate Template. Now, for a lot of us, the AWS CLI Validate Template command is our go-to first line of defense. It's right there in the CLI, it's super fast, and it doesn't create any actual resources. It just asks CloudFormation, hey, is this well-formed? But there is a really stark contrast between what we think it does and what's actually happening under the hood. You've got what it actually checks. Basically, did your JSON or YAML parse correctly? Is the structural shape okay? Do the parameters line up? And that's kind of it. Then you have what developers assume it checks, the actual CloudFormation resource specifications. Newsflash, it absolutely does not do that. It only checks the basic high-level structure. It has zero clue if the AWS resources you're asking for actually make any sense, which, let's be real, creates a pretty dangerous false sense of security. Here's an incredibly common example that hits the nail right on the head. Take a simple typo. Bucket name with a lowercase n versus bucket name with a capital N. We have all done this. If you use the lowercase n, your template will pass the CLI validation perfectly. The CLI basically gives it a thumbs up and says, yep, the shape looks great. But the absolute second you push that to deployment, it will fail hard and trigger that agonizing 20-minute rollback we just talked about. The CLI never even bothered to check if that specific property accepts the value you gave it, or if it matched Amazon's ridiculously strict capitalization rules. So the core takeaway is perfectly captured in this quote from the mysterious code research. Validate template only checks the structure. To catch those mistakes before you deploy, you need a linter. Basically, if the CLI command fails, you can be 100% sure your stack won't build. But if it passes, that is definitely not a guarantee that it's going to deploy successfully. Even AWS points this out in their own best practices. We have to go way deeper than just structural validation. Which brings us to Section 2, the true hero, cfn-lint. If the CLI is our flawed hero, cfn-lint is the real deal. It's a total game changer. This is the official linter designed from the ground up by the actual CloudFormation team to catch the hidden, nasty errors that the basic CLI just blindly waves right on through. It's checking your template against current AWS resource specs, matching your code against a massive list of best practices, and yeah, it finds those annoying property typos like our lowercase bucket name disaster. It immediately flags invalid values and alerts you if you're missing required properties. And the absolute best part, the developer experience is vastly superior. It points exactly to the wrong line and the exact wrong property in your code way before you ever try to deploy. Seeing them side by side really puts it into perspective. You've got the AWS CLI acting as a basic bouncer at the door, checking general shapes and capabilities, like if you're asking for capability_IAM permissions. But cfn-lint? cfn-lint is doing the actual heavy lifting inside. It's validating the property typos, the invalid values, the missing properties directly against actual AWS specifications. It just perfectly illustrates why structural validation on its own is never enough, and why cfn-lint takes the baton right where the CLI stops running. Now, if you're working on a real engineering team, which most of us are, and you're running these checks in a CI pipeline, you probably want to run cfn-lint in a container, right? That way you don't have to install it locally on every single build machine. But, well, there's a bit of a snag here. The CloudFormation team has surprisingly never shipped an official, up-to-date Docker image for this, and community images usually just drift out of date or quietly die. But to solve this, the authors over at Mysterious Code actually created and maintain a public Docker image that completely rebuilds itself daily the second a new cfn-lint release drops. It is a fantastic, super reliable resource to keep your pipelines running smoothly with the absolute latest checks. All right, let's wrap this up with Section 3, Automating Your Validation Journey. Look, it's one thing to know about these amazing tools, but the real magic happens when we build a system where you never ever have to deal with a manual console rollback again. The whole point is to shift away from, I hope the developer remembers to run this, to the system does it automatically for everyone. Here's what that journey looks like. Step 1, while writing. You run cfn-lint right from your command line or baked into your code editor to get that instant real-time feedback. Step 2, on commit. You set up git pre-commit hooks. This is brilliant because it literally blocks a broken template before it even hits the branch. And finally, step 3, in your pipeline. Running both the CLI and cfn-lint in continuous integration means that pushing clean, valid templates becomes a non-negotiable team standard, not just a nice-to-have thing someone hopefully remembers on a Friday afternoon. And that brings us to our final, arguably most important point. It's a question you really need to ask yourself and your engineering team today. Are you relying on your memory or your pipeline? Let's face reality here. On a real messy code base, any manual check that relies on a human remembering to do it will eventually get skipped. We're busy, we rush, we forget. It happens. So automate the whole shebang. Bake both of these tools into your pipeline and fail the build instead of failing your deployment. So what are you waiting for? Go automate those checks.